Bishop Akio Johnson said a very honest statement that he thinks that all of us, and he spoke in the first person plural, doubted the existence of God at one point or another. Where the sun is almost eclipsed, you know, where it's just terribly dark and you can't see.
Sudan is one of Africa's biggest countries, and though very rich in natural resources such as oil, gold, and copper, it is also one of the world's poorest. The south is tropical and fertile, inhabited mainly by Christians and animist tribes. The north is desert, overwhelmingly Muslim, and site of Khartoum, the country's capital city, from where a fundamentalist Islamic government runs the country. Ever since Arabs first appeared in Sudan, there has been a conflict between North and South set against a racial, religious, and economic background. In 1983, in violation of previous peace agreements, the Muslim government declared Sharia law throughout the country and began to severely discriminate against the black population. The resulting uprising that exploded in the south was headed up by the Sudan People's Liberation Army, SPLA. The government responded by launching a genocide campaign which initiated one of Africa's bloodiest wars. Numerous guerrilla armies have been part of this conflict, but none have sowed more death and terror than the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army.
There is a long story about the wars that happened here. It's the history of this place. 3 different wars were fought in this Katire parish. When the SPLA came, they chased away the Katunga soldiers. And then during the next war, William Nuyon, who was the deputy of Garang, decided to break away from the SPLA mainstream. That was the Second War. And then the third one was the LRA.
The LRA, they said, gather in one place so that we can have a meeting. We shall now be your people. They seemed like they wouldn't cause any problems, that they would treat everyone well. That was their policy. After all the people had gathered, they said, we aren't angry. We are your brothers. We thought that they came in good purpose. When all the people arrived for the meeting, they started tying them up, especially the man, while the others stood fearful.
This parish was cut off from the rest of the diocese since 1992, so it was about 16 or 17 years since the last priest was here. The following year, in 2008, I decided to make a move.
There was no possibility to run away and no place to go. They started killing all the men. I saw it with my own eyes. All the women and children were kept in that one place for 7 days. They all suffered from hunger. There was no food or water. Many children died from hunger. There was no food to eat, nor even water to drink. I saw it with my own eyes.
There was practically no road because the 2 bridges got blown up. It's about 50 kilometers from Torit. I went on a motorbike. It was a snail's speed. I fell down on the road several times, but I was persistent. I had to reach the people.
But some people managed to escape. I was among those running from the LRA, and I succeeded in escaping from them. I'm still alive because I ran for my life with all the strength I had. The others, who didn't have enough strength, were killed either with a panga sword or by gunshot. All my children died, except for these 3 whom the gods showed mercy. I ran away with them. 2 older ones stayed behind and were killed.
So when I crossed the first bridge, the night caught me. So I had to get my tent out, just put it up under one of the trees. It was very cold, but at the same time I was happy. I was looking forward to seeing the people here. So I continued my journey the following morning, and I arrived here around 10 a.m.
My 2 older boys died there, along with their father and my husband. According to the tradition, I was supposed to be inherited by their paternal uncle, but they have all been killed. With God's grace, at that time I was pregnant with my 4th child. It was God's providence.
Katire, a community that suffered a lot during the war. In 2002, the LRA executed almost 800 people. So an entire generation was wiped out. They were without the sacraments for 16 years. And they had sent messages saying, please come, we need to have the Eucharist. It's almost like the early Christians that Pope Benedict quotes in his document on the Eucharist saying, we can't live without the Eucharist, please send someone.
Then the celebrations started. I remained here for 4 days. We started celebrating Easter Triduum. It was also very hard because here we've got a whole generation who does not know who the priest or religious person is. We were practically starting from scratch.
Although we experienced a lot of suffering, Father Ben prayed for us that we do not leave this place. All we want to do is look after the children that God has spared for us. But those women who are always drunk are those who have lost all their children. All their children were killed by the LRA, so they started to drink. Their decision to be drunk is simply out of frustration.
The LRA, or Lord's Resistance Army, was established in Uganda, Sudan's southern neighbor, in 1985. It is a fanatical guerrilla army dedicated to overthrowing the government and to rule Uganda. The LRA attack villages, burn, rape, murder, and kidnap children that they then integrate into their ranks by force and compel to fight. The youngest guerrillas no more than 5 years old. These abductions have not ceased. Many Southerners believe that in the 1990s, Northern Sudan's Islamic government hired the LRA to terrorize the South. However, the LRA offensive is but one part of an armed conflict that has been raging between North and South for over 20 years. During the war, over 2 million people lost their lives, and over 4.5 million people were forced to flee. The government's Islamic army carried out premeditated ethnic cleansing, mainly in oil-bearing parts of the country. No humanitarian aid was allowed, whilst crops and cattle were systematically plundered or destroyed.
It's a difficult thing, the most difficult thing to go to a family who've lost their parents, brother, sister, and to say, let's forgive our enemies. They don't believe it's possible. It was the biggest challenge to talk to them, to teach them to love each other, to forgive our enemies. Is it possible to forgive? How can I say it to someone whose mother was killed? If it happens once, you can bear it, but it's recurrent. I'm talking about forgiveness, and in the meantime, another person is killed. When the war broke in Torit, it was 1992. I was 12 years old then. We were traveling with people who were going to Uganda. There was shooting there. Many people actually died on the way. when we were on the move. We kept on running. The bullets could easily hit someone. That one got shot and died. There was blood splashing on people. Many properties were destroyed, including the houses we were in. They were burnt down during the conflict. We hardly had time to gather together and run out to protect life outside our community.
People had to flee the war zone to survive. Many fled to the north in haste, often on foot, forced to abandon all their possessions. Many died on the way from starvation, thirst, or inflicted wounds. 2 million refugees, mainly Christians, ended up in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, in huge slums. Several 100,000 refugees crossed the border into Uganda and found refuge there in UN-run camps. Though meant to be temporary, many camps have been operating for nearly 30 years.
So when we arrived at the camp, the UN welcomed us and set us up in the camp. We were there as refugees. They were taking care of us. People were dying there because there was a lot of different sicknesses attacking people. People were infecting others around them. It was not easy there. Many people and animals died. Just died. It was a different life. Life at that camp was like being in prison. There was no land to till. In the time of peace, that was what we used to do at home. Here they gave us very little grain. It was not enough to plant it, to get food, to feed our children with. I had no close people around me. I did not have any relatives or friends. Because there was nobody to help you, you had to go into the bushes to fetch the firewood on your own. When I was in primary school, I was payable, so I had to fetch the firewood and then sell it. I went early in the morning to the bush around 4 o'clock, so we were in a hurry to go to school. Sometimes we were tired, but we couldn't give up. We had to survive and continue with our studies. We did all this because our parents were not there.
But refugee camps are notoriously difficult because you're in another country that sort of wants you but doesn't want you, because you're confined almost as a sort of prisoner. I mean, you can only leave the boundaries of the refugee camp with the proper permission. So you're in this very confined place. You're, on the one hand, happy to have a place to live, but on another hand, you're aware that you're not really fully welcomed into that country either. You're mixing with people from all different kinds of tribal backgrounds and places, all sort of shoved together. There's a lot of competition and jockeying for position. it's an unreal place. It's not an authentic human civilization, culture. It's artificial.
When we finished our primary school, the diocese came up with the idea of sponsoring the students to go to the secondary school. There I got the chance. The diocese paid my secondary school fee.
Many in the camps received aid from the Catholic Church, even though the war destroyed most church structures. One diocese in the south did not have a single priest for a dozen years. Many priests were killed, driven out, or arrested. Not even bishops were spared. The Bishop of Juba was imprisoned in 1996, and 2 years later, so was the Archbishop of Khartoum, the country's capital. Catholic centers were demolished at the government's behest and with its consent. During the period of forced Islamization, despite persecutions and the destruction of its infrastructure, the Church continued to fulfill its calling.
I was ordained at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. It was a beautiful, sun-shining May day. The police were outside, but nobody was really worried about any. There were no security issues. My family came in by the busloads for the ordination. It was a glorious day. One of the priests who died last year was ordained a year or two after me in a shed in the forest during the war. They couldn't even do the ordination in the church because they were afraid of an air raid. When I put my experience beside the experience of these priests, their life becomes heroically sacrificial.
Covenant. It will be shed for you and for all, so that sins may be forgiven. Do this in memory of me.
I think that something kept us together. The seminary was never closed, because if somebody was killed, if somebody would leave the seminary, we would all escape, because the war and the killings and everything else was all around us.
And forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us, and lead us not into temptation.
Every time we went and talked with people, they shouted. The anger, the frustration was too deep. But each time we said, nobody knows, God knows. People were frustrated because they had lost their material possessions. They had lost everything. But we said, as long as you're alive, you will get these material things. Diocese lost a lot, but every single time we said, as long as we are alive, we can always get other things. So the vocation was in between the dangers too. As a priest, I was near death 9 times. Literally, I escaped death. You can see the marks on my face. They come from the bullets. If you look at this hand here, This one opens wider, this one does not. I had to catch the gun that was aimed directly at me. One man was already killed. There were two of us, so I caught it. I was a young priest. I caught the gun, pushed it up quickly and shot at the tree. They do this each time when they want to join the Islamic army. They usually want to cause some pain somewhere. They have to prove themselves, otherwise if they go without any story to tell, they'll be punished. They are keen to say, I killed people. I killed 5 people. The one who's the best would say, I killed a priest. So it was the only thing they could do to join an Islamic group. My life was filled with bullets. By the second time, the fourth time, my mother told me, you're going to die from bullets. My priesthood life was not easy. These 9 cases of almost being shot were very severe. These cases were very serious. There was no possibility that you could have dodged it.
We are struggling, we won't be like you.
We have many people who have gone ahead of us. We are giving them thanks. We are proud because of the African mothers, African sons, who were registered, those who were not registered. God knows them. Those who suffered persecutions during the war. In Jebel Nuba, our catechists were crucified. It means they followed Christ. They got the instruction. So they remained firm. Adi Sasija, our catechist, he was killed in Lydia. Those are all our martyrs.
This is Jesus, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. Happy are we who are called to his birthday.
As always, the Church became the voice of those who had none. Where people are shown no respect, or indeed suffer outright annihilation, where they are not accepted, count for no more than an insect crushed underfoot, is where the Church stands up for man, woman, and child. And so the Church protected all the people of southern Sudan, endeavoring to be the voice to the world of those who had none.
On January the 9th, 2005, the Sudanese government, with President Omar al-Bashir at its head, together with the Sudan People's Liberation Army, signed a comprehensive peace agreement in Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Accordingly, a 6-year transition period began under which southern Sudan was granted a large degree of autonomy, its own parliament and president. A referendum was envisaged at the end of that period, through which the people of the south would determine whether they sought full independence. For many Sudanese, the peace agreement meant that there was reason once again to hope for a better future, a new life in a country that was free.
So there's that scene from the book, I think it's from Nehemiah, where they have a sword in one hand and a spatula or a trowel in another hand. So they're trying to rebuild the wall and defend themselves at the same time. It's the challenge really of the Sudanese to not only begin from nothing, but to also have that psychological aftermath. And there is a grief that lingers in the background. You sense it when you go to the cathedral. A cathedral should not feel like a mausoleum. But when you go into the cathedral, it's almost like a corpse.
The traumatized people say trauma, trauma, trauma. I thought that when you're beaten up, that is when you're traumatized. But you get more traumatized when you see the injustice, the killing, somebody suffering from hunger, and you're helpless. You can't do anything when somebody's dying in front of you. You can do nothing. You wish you could help, and you cannot. You get traumatized. When you go to sleep, you wish you could die because you cannot help.
We were driving back yesterday from Nauruz with a young man who works as a laborer in the diocese. He's telling us the story of the war as we're going along and where there was heavy fighting. And apparently in the early 90s, in a battle, his father was badly wounded and was carried by some of the men in his company to a place from which they had hoped to take him to safety and get treatment. But he died along the way, and the soldiers had to flee for their own lives. So they left his body, they knew exactly where it was, under a tree near the road. "15 years later, one of that company took the pains to seek out this family, which is a very beautiful thing. And they brought the mother and the two sons to the place, and the skeleton of his father was still there. And they collected the bones and put them in a small container so they could bury the bones near where he lived. It's one of those moments where you just stop talking. Because what can you say? And you start to pray. And we were praying, and he wasn't praying along with us, and I turned back, and his head was just down on the vehicle. And that's when you would really like to be able to do something that would make a difference in someone else's life. Sorry. Good afternoon. How is everyone? Inshallah cuisine? Kulu? Awa? As you know, for a while we have been showing films, sometimes Friday, but then we switch to Sunday. Films that help us to know Jesus a little better, to understand our faith, and to follow Jesus better. Any questions? You all understand everything? More or less? Okay, so we will continue with the film.
Now that we have peace, we begin to see that we are broken. Really, most of our priests are broken. That's why we created something called the healing of the healers. We as bishops were to be healed first, to be able to heal other people. Because this trauma is very serious, very serious. Somebody's getting angry at you even before you start talking. We have never ever seen it before. Now we have a lot of problems. Sickness, alcoholism begin to enter into people's lives.
These and other social problems grew more serious following the mass return of people from exile. The signing of the peace agreement in 2005 opened the door for many displaced Sudanese to return to their homes. However, the decision to leave the refugee camps was not an easy one. In spite of the very difficult conditions, the camps did provide a minimum degree of security, whereas the return journey was not only dangerous and costly, but also a great unknown as to what one would find at journey's end.
After 7 years in the camp, I decided to come back to Sudan. I joined some refugees that were going back to Sudan. There is a part of Sudan which is now okay, which is safe. People should move back. They are free now, and they are returning. They are back, and even the UN couldn't control it because the amount of people was so big. So they divided them into shifts, one group, then another group. So I wrote a letter to all our clergy, to all our deans, to welcome our people back home. They came back maybe with the idea that they will have schools waiting for them. They will get their homes, but there was nothing. We thought that now, when there was peace, we should find some changes awaiting us in our land. But when we came back home, problems appeared. The houses that we once owned were destroyed. Schools that we used to run were abandoned and destroyed too. So we do not have schools nor hospitals. These were the problems that we faced when we came back here.
I think in the last 2 years, in just one of the counties of the diocese, about 100,000 people returned, mostly from Uganda. When they come back, they're given a small package from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. It's a tarp, some pots, a jerry can of water. They may be going back to a village that was completely abandoned during the war.
They came and were pulled into conflicts over their land. People who were staying there said, "Oh, you've been out in the refugee camps, so we liberated this place so you cannot come and take this land." Somebody had a mango tree planted in his house and said, "This is my house." They answered, "No, don't disturb us. This has been the place that we had liberated."
And these were people who were displaced also during the war. And if they're from a different tribal background, that becomes an occasion of tension. You come back not knowing necessarily how many of your relatives are alive, probably having lost some of the members of your immediate family. The situation in Sudan is not like you come back and look for a job where you would in a developed country. You know, you, I don't know, apply to a department store or a business firm or something. You survive by working. So you have to have a parcel of land. You have to cultivate the land. My friend, how have you been? Kev? Ita kwes? Alhamdulillah.
On top of all these challenges came the burden of drought, all too regular in the first years of the 21st century. The United Nations declared that over 900,000 people in the south faced starvation.
Masalama. Itinin.
Famine and poverty led to regular tuberculosis epidemics, whilst malaria and the heat claim many hundreds of lives every year.
Aiwa. Okay. Okay. Masalama. Mong. Ogolo. Onai. Onida bebe? Awa? Can you go do this way? Go this way. You do. Very good.
I went to one of these places where they opened a stand with grains to sell to people. There was a lady who could not stand in this line, perhaps because she had no money or she was too weak to stand in line. She decided to kneel down, to pick the grains from the floor. How much could she collect? She collected it grain by grain, this maize, these corns, and she placed it one by one into her plate. How many grains was she able to collect? Maybe 200 milligrams? I don't know.
Milligram, I don't know.
I went to bless the people in the hospital. There was a child who was left by his mother. I think the mother went to look for food somewhere. As I was passing by him in the next row, this child said, "I'm also here, Father." And I said, "I'm coming." So I went to him thinking that he needed a blessing. I started praying and I put my hands over him. And then he said, "I don't need prayers, I need food." I felt very guilty because before coming to the hospital, I had my breakfast, I had some tea and so on. I was satisfied and this young boy was not. My attitude changed. You cannot go somewhere and pray whilst somebody is sitting next to you, dying.
The people of South Sudan never know what tomorrow will bring. Perhaps another drought, or yet another attack by the LRA, or perhaps 100 more refugees will arrive in the village. The people of the South have waited for a breakthrough throughout their country's history. In accordance with the peace agreement signed in 2005, after 6 years, on January the 9th, 2011, a referendum has enabled them to decide about their future, whether to live in an independent country or remain part of one big Islamic state. On January the 9th, 2011, nearly all those entitled to vote took part in a referendum. Over 98% voted for an independent South Sudan. It is the emergence of the world's youngest country, the Republic of South Sudan.
Throughout these years of misery, these people knew they were accompanied. They knew the Lord protected them. And that's why we can hear today, after this victory, we can hear songs of elation, songs of joy, songs of gratitude. They are convinced that what they have got is a gift from God. Our role is to take up that very powerful witness from people who succeeded to pass through the valley of tears.
For 20 years, the church and the people of Sudan were prostrate on the ground, dodging bullets. Now they're on their hands and knees. They want to stand up. But to be able to stand up, they need an arm or a shoulder or somebody to be there with them so they can stand up, get steady, take a few steps forward, and begin to walk on their own.
I started the life now.
I started a new life now. After completing my studies, I married a woman, my wife. When we got married, we had a child, our firstborn. That was in the year 2000. In 2002, we also had a child, also a boy. I started thinking that I have to grow now as a man, because there is no other way. I did not marry in the local church yet. I should give a quarter of the dowry and then marry my wife, because in our culture, if you don't give anything and you get married in church, tomorrow a family will grab their daughter back, along with the children. They take everything, so you're left with nothing. When I was working, we were getting some incentives, and I had to keep these incentives, buy a cow with it, save up, not spend everything on drink. That's how I was saving money. I'm still left with 17 cows to give.
The Sudanese need to be given an opportunity to process that, to move through that, to pull themselves together with the awareness that we don't function like machines. We're not computers. And even if we were, how often do you have problems with your computer? You know, it doesn't do what you want. Part of our humanity means that we have to, there's a whole redemption, a whole processing of memories, a whole healing of wounds. And where the church has a unique role is the assurance that we don't do this alone. We have the gift of God's grace, the gift of His mercy, the help of the sacraments, the presence of Christ, the patience of Christ, the mercy of Christ. And these are the things that can enable us to navigate the turbulent wake after the war. If the war was the ship, you have the wake that comes behind it until you can get to smoother waters.